Hi everyone, and I've come to you today prompted by our fourth episode where we were talking to Brian Johnson and his sharing on how after choosing to be his most authentic self, where he came out as queer, he noticed making like more and more positive choices and getting more and more success in terms of his goals for that given moment. And there's actually evidence and research that indicates that this isn't just a personal anecdotal experience, but very much there's a link, a causal link between and experiencing traits and well-being impacts for you that could be seen as positive. And there's one article that I was going to talk about today, and Sheldon et al. There's two studies that they did, and they looked into the Big Five model of personality traits. So this goes into some core traits of extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience, as well as some theories of personality that come from an organismic and existential point of view. And I'll give you a little teaser trailer before we go into it. We're learning from this study that being our authentic selves includes variations in how we show up. So it's not just, oh, you're this one person all the time, and that's how you need to experience a positive impact. You can be beautifully diverse in your different, what they call key life roles. So they give examples of like being a student, being a parent, teacher, employee, that sort of thing. And consider, because if we know that certain traits can come out like being open to experience, we can arguably say that that will make it easier or like more effective in your behavior and decisions when you're moving through something that's challenging, an experience of fear. So like even if it's just motivation for us to be our most authentic selves, knowing that actually that is going to be a key tool, a key mechanism for us to get into that place that Sheldon et al. Did was two large groups held with research assistants over a 2-week period. And these were largely based on questionnaires. One questionnaire that was focused on sort of personality traits, and one that was focused on general well-being questions, statements. And they were a sample of 193 undergrads in the upper division psychology course at the University of Rochester. They didn't find any statistical differences between gender, but they had 137 women and 56 men, and they were participating in this study for extra credit. So it's worth noting that they don't share the demographics of that group, but it's unlikely to be representative of the world. So these are interesting ideas, but perhaps not one to take as firm conclusions for everyone. Where they were looking at the personality traits and the well-being and doing comparison of that across some core life roles, the team concluded, firstly, that people show significant cross-situational consistency in the Big Five personality traits. So, interestingly, people were least open to experience in the student role and most in the romantic role, which makes me think of when we had our conversation with Nithya, and she has that like approaching fear through love. It's interesting considering the power of having a kind of more loving outlook in being open to experience. Another conclusion that they had was that the more relatively authentic people felt within a particular role, then the more they exhibited the personality traits of being extroverted, being conscientious, agreeable, open to experience, and then the opposite of neurotic, non-neurotic. Where there was a role that the person felt they could be their most authentic self in, they also then were exhibiting behaviors that showed being extroverted, open to experience, etc. Final one to say is that when people are being more authentic in their roles and positive well-being outcomes. So it's interesting that we can learn from this that being inauthentic will cause issues for us in terms of our well-being. And as we know, being regulated, feeling well, puts us in that position to be able to move through fear and choose and just be aware of like the emotion concepts that are coming up for us and how we're moving through those. That being authentic doesn't mean that you have to be one set way all the time. Being authentic includes this variation in the personality traits, and that can go between the sort of different roles that you have in life. I think sometimes it's felt a bit like you can query, like, am I being myself? Because I'm so different when I'm with my friends than with my partner or at work, etc., with your family. So perhaps take this as a bit of reassurance that it doesn't matter per se if you're being a consistent sort of version of yourself, as long as all those versions feel authentic to you. Know if we're being authentic, maybe try using some of the measures that they used in this study. So I'll go through those and you can have a go at doing that yourself. One is, I experience this aspect of myself as an authentic part of who I am. So rate this from 9, strongly agree, down to 1, strongly disagree. Second statement, this aspect of myself is meaningful and valuable to me. The third, I have freely chosen this way of being. 4, and this one and the fifth one are in like reverse. So 9 becomes strongly disagree and 1 becomes strongly agree. So 4 is, I am only this way because I have to be. And the fifth one, I feel tense and pressured in this part of my life. So when you've got those statements, first, like, sit with the behavior, the way of being that you're trying to consider, is that my authentic self? Really like immerse yourself in that role and reflect about, like, what was I thinking in that moment? What was I feeling? And what sort of behaviors, how was I responding? And then rate yourself against these measures. And that can give you a picture of, well, you're really authentic or maybe less authentic in that moment. Something to think about. Have a go. Let me know if that was useful. Then the second study largely replicated what was done in the first one, but this time adding in some new measures of strain and stress felt. So we're trying to understand what was going on behind the negative well-being impact when you're not being your authentic self, like what is going on there. And this were the graduates from the psychology course, this time with 116, and there was 42 men and 74 women. And again, they said that they didn't notice a statistical significance in the difference between men and women's responses. And they note that the people participating in the second study weren't involved in the first study. So study 2, as well as retesting, they replicated the findings found in the first study. They also added in the sense of conflict felt between role identities and whether that is underlying the negative well-being effect noticed when people aren't being authentic. And they concluded that positive well-being, yes, comes from when people are feeling most authentic in their roles, as well as when you're experiencing low conflict between roles and rate themselves similarly in these different roles in life. And what was interesting was that this study started talking about, well, what does this mean for the modern world? And their modern would be our recent past, because this study was done in 1997. But it does make me think of that 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, whose author I've currently forgotten the name of, who talks about, in the modern world, our roles are going to keep changing more frequently because we have to keep changing, perhaps like career, we have to keep retraining, and you have like different roles where like the world is changing, you might be moving country more. So that's like your identity wrapped around one role might start changing because you're having to do a different role in life. And when you think of like back in the day, you might have trained as a teacher, you've been a teacher your whole life. So a lot of your personality traits will have sort of come out and be nurtured by that particular environment. Now it's more and more common. Yuval, I think was his name. Yeah, Yuval was saying that it's now more and more common to be having to change career. So you're having to change identity and retrain in something. So although it can still be getting in touch with different authentic parts of you, that does sound like a lot of strain to be sort of re-engaging with yourself and developing who you are and managing that. And this study, Sheldon et al., has touched on that even then. So they were saying that they noticed that role conflict had an equal effect on the well-being as authenticity and consistency. So they were wondering if this means that you could be fully authentic when you're behaving very differently and in very different roles, so you don't feel any conflict between who you are in these different roles, but just the development and maintenance of the like inner diversity of your authentic self showing up in these different ways produces some strain and stress upon you. What do you think of that? Have you like experienced that in any changes that you've had so far? It'd be really interesting to explore that more, try and get some more recent studies and see how much of an impact the more fast-paced world of different jobs and moving jobs more regularly is having on us in terms of that lens of how we're getting in touch and showing different parts of ourselves and managing getting in touch with different parts of ourselves more frequently. Keep an eye on the horizon. There might be another one coming back that will link to this. And that's everything that we'll go through today. Something to think about. So very much reinforcing that being authentic, don't worry about being consistent, but being authentic in the different roles that you have, the different ways that you're showing up, will be a helpful mechanism for you to access the traits that can make your decisions and feelings and thoughts more effective when moving through challenge and fear, as well as having positive impacts on your well-being generally. And I would love to know how you resonate with the idea of the different like conflicts that can happen from managing the variation in your authenticity and what that does for you on a day-to-day basis. Until next time, lovely chatting with you.